Hello, everybody, and welcome to the One Good Day podcast. My name is Jeff Baskin, and today I am joined by Gabrielle Ferrara. Good afternoon, Gabrielle. How are you doing?
I'm good, Jeff. How are you? Thanks for having
I,
me.
I am fantastic, and I did pronounce your name correctly,
You
right?
did, yes, Ferrara.
Awesome. Always like to get that right out of the gate. Before we get started, for those that are listening that don't know who you are, if you can tell everybody basically your specialty, as far as, are you a therapist? What do you do in the panic and anxiety space? And then also please feel free to provide your social media, your website, anywhere people can find you.
Yeah, of course. So again, my name is Gabrielle Ferrara. I am an LCSW, so licensed clinical social worker in New Jersey. And I currently work in a private practice, a group private practice, and I see clients that struggle with anxiety, OCD, life transitions, and anxiety around life transitions. And I also work with eating disorders. So that's kind of my specialty in the therapy world. And in terms of social media, you can find me on Instagram. My handle is therapist who sees a therapist with underscore between each of those words. So therapist who sees a therapist with the underscores on Instagram.
And so I have to know where did that come from as far as like how did you choose that as your handle?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I have had my own experience with mental health, with anxiety, OCD, for many, many years. And I've been going to therapy for years. And it was kind of my own experience with mental health that encouraged me and motivated me to get into the field myself as a professional. And something that I was very, very adamant about going into this field as a professional was I always want to normalize that it's okay to be human as a therapist. So I'm very open about the fact that I'm a therapist, but I also see my therapist regularly. And just as much as, I'm a professional, I'm also a human who struggles with mental health. So that's kind of been my main goal on social media and also as a professional so far in the field.
Yeah, that's usually one of the first questions we ask as far as your personal experience with panic and anxiety.
Mhm.
So how long have you been dealing with it personally?
So clinically, like diagnosably, probably for about 10 plus years, but I can trace back time to my childhood and experiences back in my childhood where I definitely had some anxious behaviors and tendencies that were not quite diagnosed yet or picked up on. So probably for the majority of my life. I did eventually get diagnosed with anxiety and OCD during my high school years and began, getting proper treatment and therapy. But I can remember feeling kind of anxious for as long as I can remember.
And so just to give some people some personal insight into you, what have you found to be most effective in your treatment of dealing with anxiety?
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, I go to therapy regularly. I have engaged in a particular type of therapy called ERP, so exposure and response prevention therapy. And that's a type of therapy that's really effective for OCD and for anxiety as well, where you are essentially exposed to some of your fears and some of your anxieties, and you work to not engage in compulsive behaviors or rituals to alleviate that anxiety. So, over time, it teaches your brain and your body and all that kind of stuff to habituate the anxiety and to be able to cope with it, manage it, and tolerate the uncertainty. So that therapy has been really, really effective for me, as well as acceptance and commitment therapy. So ACT is a really great therapy that I use myself as well. And in particular, the idea of identifying my values and the things that are important to me help me overcome my anxiety and tolerate, again, that discomfort, that uncertainty, because I can identify the things that are important to me that are at stake. So it makes it a little bit motivating for me to manage that anxiety.
Fantastic. And yeah, we'll have to circle back after this and talk about, maybe having you back for ERP.
Yeah.
Definitely would love to hear more about that because I struggle with some of those issues myself in regards to OCD and ritual, especially around health. But we are here for not that today. Today, we're going to be talking about how to get the most out of your session with a therapist. And, we want to start from the beginning, as far as when you either first get diagnosed with panic and anxiety or when you're starting with a new therapist. So, how do you feel it's best for someone, especially in your shoes, who not only sees a therapist but also is a therapist, how do you best prepare for that first therapy session, especially if you're feeling anxious about therapy as an experience?
Right, yeah. So the first thing that I usually tell people is it's okay to be nervous and anxious. So first of all, normalize that for yourself. Normalize it, acknowledge it, and don't feel any shame and guilt around it as much as possible. Try not to feel those emotions or embarrassment or anything like that, because it's totally normal to be nervous going into your first therapy session. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing, uncommon about that. So first of all, normalize that for yourself, and also it's okay to bring that into the room with the therapist. So when you go into your first session, it's okay to say, hey, I'm feeling a little bit nervous about this. I'm feeling a little uncomfortable. Maybe I haven't done this before. It's okay to say that to your therapist because, again, it's very normal and they can help guide you through that process and help you feel comfortable and help you acclimate to being in therapy. So those are kind of two things: normalize it for yourself and also bring it into the room and help your or have your therapist help guide you through it. Oh, go ahead.
I was
Sorry.
gonna say, is it also possibly a decent idea if writing is your thing to potentially journal or write out whatever is making you nervous as far as going to the session, and either sending that to your therapist ahead of time
Mhm.
or bringing that with you to the session?
You must have read my mind. That was going to be the next point that I brought up was jotting down some ideas before you go into that therapy session. So making a note on your phone. Some clients even like doing like a voice memo. So, you can just kind of talk to yourself and have a voice memo recorded. So all those types of things are great because what happens, and again, this is totally normal, is you might know what you want to say, know what you want to talk about, and then you get into the therapy room or, you get into the virtual session and it all goes out your brain. And it could be helpful to have that list or that note to yourself of things that you want to bring up or important things that you want to make sure your therapist knows.
Would that also include your expectations as far as what you're hoping to get out of your therapy as a whole?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I think that's a common question that therapists do ask, so it's good to be prepared for it. And even if the therapist does not explicitly ask, it's a great idea to voice that. What are your expectations? What are you hoping to get out of it? What's important to you about the therapeutic relationship? What's important to you about those types of things? And I think, we'll get into that a little bit later, but all those things are very important to talk about, right from the jump, because it does indicate down the line, how effective therapy could be for you.
Yeah, I mean that to me, all like as far as expressing your expectations can also lead to this gray area in regards
Mhm,
to especially some of these other, I guess, specialty therapies, EMDR,
mhm.
hypnotherapy, CBT, some of that. I mean, there are definitely therapists out there that are like, I'll cure you in 4 sessions, that kind of thing. So I think
Right.
that where's your stance as far as like making sure that you talk about those types of expectations? Because I am like you, that I've been dealing with my issues for a while, and anytime I hear something new, I'm like, ooh, maybe this will fix me. And then you see like the therapist like, yeah, 6 sessions will knock this out, and then here
Mhm.
we are 20 minutes later. I've been to 12 of those therapists who can knock it out in 6 sessions, and we're still here. So let's talk a little bit about that as far as making sure that you temper your expectations and talk about those types of things with your therapist as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You bring up a great point that I think sometimes there is that expectation for short-term therapy and short-term solutions. And granted, there are definitely situations where that's possible, but the reality is that in most situations, therapy is a process. It's not kind of a problem and solution type of like point A to point B sort of situation. It's usually a process. And I explain that to clients. I say, the first few sessions here are going to be us just getting to know each other. Of course, we're going to start to tackle some of the issues, some of the reasons you're coming in, but we don't know each other yet. And until we know each other, until we're comfortable with each other, the bulk of the work isn't going to begin yet because we really need to get to know each other. And so I do kind of, give those expectations of therapy as a process. It's a journey. It's not, something that you come in here and you leave and you're fixed, because quite honestly, fixed implies that you're broken and you're not broken for coming into therapy. So I think that that's an important kind of precedent to set is, you're not broken, so you're not going to be fixed. And this is a process and a relationship that we're going to go on together.
And would you feel that's a red flag for any therapist that's, as a patient and I'm starting a new therapist, would that be a red flag as far as like a therapist saying, I can fix this in 4 to 6 sessions? And then what would some of the other potential red flags be as far as when you are seeing a new therapist?
Yeah, so I don't think it's inherently a red flag. I think there's different situations where, every client is different, every therapist is different. Maybe there has been some sort of short-term trigger, short-term, issue that's come up. So I wouldn't say it's inherently a red flag. I would just say in more situations than not, that's not usually the timeline or that's not usually the reality. It's usually a little bit longer and more in depth than that. Some other red flags in terms of, looking for a new therapist or meeting a new therapist really comes from how you're feeling in the room as the client, because the important thing is that you feel comfortable with the therapist. So I always tell new clients, I'm not the right fit for every client. I wouldn't be, that wouldn't be good. If every therapist was the right fit for every client, like we're doing something wrong. I'm not supposed to be the right fit for every client. But the important thing is that the client feels comfortable in the room and feels like they can open up and feels like they can be themselves. And that is kind of the first thing that I think people should be aware of is listen to your gut feeling when you're meeting with your therapist for the first time. Listen to, what your body is telling you, what thoughts you're having, what reactions you're having. Are you feeling like you're being judged? Do you feel like you need to kind of censor yourself? Ask yourselves all those types of questions and listen to your gut feeling about, what feedback you're getting from your body and from your thoughts about that relationship, because that's truly going to be, your guiding force in terms of determining if it's the right
And so let's say your gut is neutral.
fit.
Let's say you're not feeling good, you're not feeling bad. How important do you feel the client therapist relationship is? Should it feel like a mentor? Should it feel like a friend? Should it feel like all the above? Do you need this bond to get the benefits from therapy?
Yeah, so it's interesting because neutral is not inherently a bad thing. Neutral can kind of just mean that, it's a relationship you feel comfortable, you feel safe, but it's not anything, um, to write home about necessarily. But what I will say is that research does continue to show that the therapeutic relationship, the relationship between client and therapist is just as important, if not more important, than any treatment modalities or like evidence-based treatment. The relationship is the main predictor of success in therapy. So with that in mind, neutral is not inherently a bad thing, but you do want to make sure that that relationship feels like something that can be fostered and can be strengthened over time. Even if it does take a little bit of time, that's totally normal, but it does have to feel like it's something that you can really lean into and engage with, because that relationship is going to be the strongest predictor of your success in therapy.
And so, as somebody that deals with anxiety, how does, and a lot of times, obviously, people are somewhat walled up, reserved, etc. So, how do you go about, I mean, because the therapist could be perfectly fine, it could be the person that's having the issue. So, how does the client work on building that relationship and getting comfortable to open up so that it can foster that good relationship?
Yeah, so I always reinforce that I'm just another human being in the room as a therapist. And that's kind of going back to what I was saying a little bit earlier also is at the end of the day, therapy is two human beings having a conversation. That's what it is. I mean, of course, I've been to school, I've been trained, I'm the professional in the room, but when it comes down to it, it's two human beings having a conversation. And I think when we reframe it that way, that can be really helpful for clients, especially if they're feeling anxiety, because it takes a little bit of the pressure out of, having to say certain things or feeling like you're in a um, unequal relationship or anything like that. So I always reinforce, I'm just another human. I have human experiences. We can talk about some of my experiences if that would be helpful for you. I use those types of techniques in the therapy room, as well as humor, as well as empathy, as well as things that make clients feel like, I'm just a person that you're chatting with right now. And that's all this has to be for right now. And that can be really helpful, I think, in reducing that initial anxiety.
Yeah. And I'll throw in my 2 cents here after being in therapy for 20 years, one of the other things that I find very helpful for me to give to the information to give to the therapist is basically how my brain works and also how I'm going to try and combat the therapist or avoid what the therapist wants me to do that makes me feel uncomfortable, or the basically the mental chess that I will play in therapy. Even though it's subconscious, I want to be there, I want to get better, but there are definitely certain walls and certain things that I'm afraid to do based on my anxieties, and I will let those out at the beginning so
Mhm.
that they know how to work around that and to best serve me, versus us dancing around for 2 months and then them
Mhm.
having to figure it out on their own.
Absolutely. I think that's a great idea because, therapists are great people, but we're not mind readers. So I think anything that you can tell us that about you or your previous experience in therapy is so helpful, because that way, like you said, we can kind of adjust and help as much as we can, with those types of reservations or maybe things that might make it a little bit more difficult.
Yeah, when you're comfortable feeling vulnerable, it's good to let out what you're afraid of, what you're afraid to do, how, what situations you're going to feel pushed in, or give you that raise your level of anxiety, because that will help your therapist to provide a better treatment plan, as well as know how you're going to basically resist what they're trying to do to help you, so that they
Right.
can either find another way around it or help you cope with it to get there faster. Because
Yep,
I've
absolutely.
I've wasted months visiting therapists and just dancing around week after week after week because I was afraid to do what they told me to do that would help get me better.
Yep, absolutely. Very common. Yeah.
So, with that, let's transition into what are some of the other key strategies or techniques clients can use, to work out with the therapist to maximize the benefits of therapy.
Yeah. So there's a couple things here. So one of them I kind of mentioned previously in terms of preparing for session. So making a note on your phone, making a voice memo. Some therapists, and you have to check with your individual therapist about this, but some therapists allow you to maybe like text them in between sessions as a form of journaling, essentially. So, I'll do that with my clients. I'll say, I might not respond to your text message, but if something comes up and you want to make sure we address it in the next session, you can text it to me, email it to me, and that way, I have a mental note that we can talk about this in the next session. So again, each individual therapist is different with that, but that's another option as well. But the main idea is preparing for sessions so that you go in and you have a general idea of kind of what direction you would like to take the session that day. That's first of all. And then the other thing is being honest while you're in the therapy room. So again, this can be a little difficult, especially in the beginning. We talked about that, right? It's tricky and it's vulnerable and it feels uncomfortable. But as much as possible, I would encourage people to be honest because we as therapists can only work with what you give us or what you tell us or what you're bringing into the room. We can't read your minds. We can't see back into the past and kind of know what's
and
going on from. Yeah.
and lying and or telling the therapist what you think they want to hear does not benefit you as the
Exactly.
patient or client. And I mean, unfortunately, that's a problem that I have in my own personal life, as far as like, I am a people pleaser and I want to tell people what they want to hear so they don't get mad at me and they don't
Yep.
stop loving me, et cetera, et cetera. And that is the worst when it comes to therapy, because it's like, did you do your homework? Did you do what you were supposed to do? And you're like, yes, I did. I'm a great student. And even though you didn't, and it doesn't help you get better. So I'm 100% in agreement as far as honesty is so important. But
Yes,
it's
and
it's hard sometimes
it's
for people
hard.
with anxiety.
It's very hard. But like you said, you don't get an A plus in therapy. You can't get a good grade in therapy. So the good grade or the good, if you want to think of it out that way, the A plus comes if you're being vulnerable and honest. And even if that means, saying I didn't do my homework this week, or, I maybe wasn't completely honest with you last time, or there's something I want to talk about today that I haven't brought up before. All those types of statements, like that's what therapy is about. And I know me as a therapist and some of my colleagues, I'll never be mad or disappointed at my clients if they don't, do their homework or if something was hard for them that we talked about. Like that's not what this is about. I'd rather you be honest and tell me what's going on and we can work together to move forward through whatever's going on.
Yeah. And, so once you are in the situation, you feel comfortable, you get through those first few sessions, how do you feel? What's your strategy as far as setting goals and setting up like realistic and meaningful goals and objectives that you're trying to accomplish with therapy?
Yeah, so I believe that, the goals that you make in therapy should be client directed. So it's client directed goals are the most effective because by the client creating the goals and, bringing up goals that are meaningful to them, they'll be the most successful in achieving those goals because they're things that are important to you as the client. However, of course, the therapist is there to offer guidance or kind of like scaffolding of these goals, right? So if a client brings up a goal that is a great goal, but maybe is a little bit too big, too fast for where they are right now, the therapist can gently guide, like, hey, that's a great goal and I definitely want to get to that point, but how can we maybe tailor it a little bit right now just so that it feels manageable, it feels like something you can accomplish, and that way you get that sense of accomplishment and get that sense of, I was able to meet this goal, because that essentially is what's going to be the biggest motivating factor, is reflecting on your past successes as a client in therapy and being able to say, hey, I set this goal and I did it and now I'm ready. I feel like I can do the next one, or I feel like I can do the next hard thing because I was able to do this last hard thing. And the only way we do that is if we set goals that are appropriate for us in that moment. So that's why client directed goals are important, and therapist guidance and sort of scaffolding of those goals is what makes it, fully accomplishable.
So basically, you want to have some smaller goals and then potentially one larger goal. Is that also something that you may want to throw in there? Or do you feel that if you have that larger goal, maybe it's going to take a while to get there, and having that kind of like looming in the horizon isn't always beneficial? Like, what do you feel about that?
In terms of the big goal, I like to see that more as I'm going to use the word value, like it's something that's a value to you, because when we look at it that way, it's something that we're working towards in kind of a long-term, bigger picture way. So I'll give you an example. So, sometimes clients will come in and they say, hey, I really want to be a parent someday, but I have these kind of anxieties and these things that are making me hesitant, these things that I'm nervous about, maybe I'm nervous about with OCD, for example, like germs or getting sick, and kids are sick all the time, so I'm really nervous about that. Those types of things. And I want to look at their goal of being a parent not so much as an end destination, but more of a value, more of a motivating factor to do all those little things that are going to get them to that big picture thing that, is their guiding force right now.
Okay. Um, so that, I guess that brings up that next point as far as like how do you help clients continue to keep that motivation and that same drive as when they start, that if maybe they have setbacks, or maybe they're not seeing the improvement. I mean, because that's, for me, I've been dealing with the same issue for the last few years, and it's just a constant one step forward, two steps back type of situation. So how do you keep clients moving forward and feeling motivated to continue with trying to get better?
Yeah. So that's a really great question. And I think it can be discouraging sometimes, because what happens in therapy is you go and you open up about all these things that maybe you've never talked about before, maybe you've never realized before, and maybe the therapist is, calling you out on certain things that you've never really acknowledged before. And so it does feel maybe like it's getting harder before it's getting easier. And I think that that is a totally normal experience. However, it can feel very discouraging. So I always encourage clients to remember that it's a process. It's a process where it might feel like, one step forward, two steps back sometimes. It also might feel like day to day, nothing is changing, but try to look at the bigger picture of, when we look back at where you were a month, 6 months, a year ago, what's different, what's changed. And it might not be tangible things necessarily. It might be things like you've become more self reflective of yourself, you've become more self aware, you're recognizing problems or behaviors that are problematic for you. Maybe you're challenging yourself in different ways. So all of those things are signs that therapy is quote unquote working. They just might not necessarily be like tangible items that we can pick out and say, oh yeah, like there's proof that therapy is working. It might be some of those more abstract things about how your interaction with the world and the people around you is changing.
Okay. And um, so how many sessions do you usually think that people should give a therapist before potentially pulling the ripcord and finding somebody else? Because if you're in session, I'm in this dilemma myself right now. I'm seeing somebody and we're not making the type of progress that I want to make. We're 12 sessions in,
Mm-hmm.
and it's been unfortunately increasingly combative as far as my frustrations are concerned. So it's like, when do you make the decision in regards to, it's like, okay, I really need to think about other options, so that you can find somebody that's right for you.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I'm sorry you're having that experience personally right now. It's hard to put a number on it, and I don't want to necessarily put a hard number on it because sometimes right from the beginning, and that's totally okay. Like I don't want to say necessarily that if your gut feeling with your first therapist, your first session with your therapist is it's not a good fit, I don't want to invalidate that or say that that's like too soon to know that because it might not be. You might know that right from the jump. However, I would typically recommend to give it, definitely more than one, definitely a couple of sessions because going back to what I said before, therapists are human too, and it's possible that maybe therapist was having an off day, you were having an off day as a client, the energy just wasn't right that particular day, and it could be completely different next week when you meet. And that's important just to get kind of more than one session's worth of evidence that it's not a good fit. So that was kind of not a straight answer there, but I would encourage people to trust their gut to know what you need and what you're looking for. However, give it some time, give it a couple sessions to really get to know the therapist and get to know the environment and really gauge it from those few experiences.
And for somebody that's new in the therapy setting, what advice would you give to them in regards to helping them open up and be vulnerable? I know that's incredibly difficult for some, especially that deal with trauma. And then also, how do you feel that the client can help build trust so that they can feel more comfortable?
Hmm. It's tricky, and I don't want to, for one second, make it seem like it's not tricky because it very much is. And I think similar to what we talked about before, the most important thing is speaking that into the room and speaking it into existence if you are feeling that way, because the therapist can help guide you in a more effective way if they know that you're feeling that way or that you're having a tough time. And they can help follow your lead and help guide you through the process if they know that you're struggling with opening up or struggling with vulnerability. So definitely bring that up with your therapist. I think that's a really important factor. The other thing is, again, similar to what we said before, remembering your therapist is just another human being in the room can be really, really helpful, because therapy is objectively a very awkward situation. There's this complete stranger in front of you that you're expected to kind of bare your heart and soul to and like all your most vulnerable moments, and it's awkward. It's as a concept, looking, zooming out and looking in, therapy is awkward. However, just like any human relationship or any budding relationship, it does get easier with time and it does get more comfortable with time. So thinking about other human relationships you've had, when you first started dating your partner, when you first made a new friend, when you first went to college and met your roommate, like all of those human moments were awkward and weird at first too. And so just to kind of give it perspective, therapy is similar in the sense that you're meeting a brand new human that you're expected to kind of open up to, and it's hard. So, recognizing that, bringing into the room, talking about it with your therapist, all those things will definitely make it a little bit easier.
Yeah, and not to burst anybody's bubble out there, but more than likely you have a story that any experienced therapist has heard before.
Yeah.
And, being, a little bit open and honest with them at the beginning, they have probably been down this road and have techniques and tactics that can help you feel more comfortable because they've done it with so many other people. So I think a lot of times people feel that they're unique.
Hmm.
And while I don't want to rain on anybody's parade here, it's like a lot of times you fit into a certain bucket as other people have before you, and your therapist should know a way to point you in the right direction.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about what you can do outside of therapy to make your therapy more effective. Do you have any advice as far as self help tools or resources that you can recommend to people that will make their therapy more effective or make their sessions better by doing outside work?
Yeah, so definitely reflecting after therapy sessions. I think that's a fairly, easy one to do is whether you do it with a journal, with a note in your phone, again, just talking out loud, whatever is helpful for you. I think reflecting after therapy can be really, really beneficial because you're giving yourself a chance to really take in what you talked about, think about how you're feeling afterwards, thinking about maybe what you would like to say at the next session. You're giving yourself that chance to really reflect and embrace what just happened in therapy because again, therapy is a weird situation where you're very vulnerable for 45 minutes to an hour, and then you're like, oh, time's up, and I have to go back into the real world now. And, like, there's traffic, and there's work, and there's deadlines, and there's not always that time to recognize, hey, I just had this really emotional, vulnerable hour, and now, like, I just have to go back into real life. So, as much as possible, giving yourself that kind of buffer period to reflect, to um, decompress, to really think about, what just happened and let yourself feel whatever you're feeling. So that's really important. The other thing that could be helpful, I think, is having, I call it an accountability buddy. So someone in your life besides your therapist who could kind of, be your accountability buddy for what you're working on in therapy. So tell them what you've talked about with your therapist, what you're working on, what your therapist recommends, and say, hey, it's going to be hard for me to do these things. So can you help hold me accountable? Can you help remind me? Can you help maybe guide me through these things? That might be helpful as well.
I've always thought it was $1 million business idea, anxiety buddies, kind of
Yeah.
like a matchmaking service for people with anxiety,
Yep.
because
Hmm.
it's hard to do that with people in your life that don't have anxiety and don't
Yep.
understand. Like,
Hmm.
God bless my sister, because when I have my anxiety, she is my go-to person,
Hmm.
and she has her own daily stresses and stuff, but she doesn't suffer from anxiety, but she
Hmm.
has the heart of a saint because she answers my calls and she always talks to me. But having somebody else who understands what you're going through
Hmm.
can be really, really beneficial. And I've always thought it'd be great if you could find a service, or start a service that can match people together to help them, get through their anxieties together. Because
Yeah, that'd be great. That's a good Shark Tank idea. I think maybe we'll
yeah,
bring it to.
there you go. Well, we'll talk after. Um, so we're going to get to the portion where we have some questions from the audience. If you want to submit questions, send us an email to jeff@panicsandanxiety.org, or you can reach us on any of our social channels, which are at PACS, PACS Social, which is Instagram and TikTok and Facebook. One of the questions is, for someone that's hesitant starting therapy and getting the help they need, what advice do you have for them and how can they take the first step?
This is a great question. So, what I would say is the key to this is curiosity. So, I'll explain a little bit more about that. So, curiosity, I think, is the best tool we have sometimes within ourselves. We don't have to be hopeful. We don't have to be excited. We don't have to go in being like, I know this is going to change me. I know this is going to be awesome. I'm so hopeful. I'm so excited. That'd be great if you're feeling that way, but let's face it, it doesn't always feel that way going into therapy. However, if you can access curiosity, I think that that might be the best thing for you in this moment because what curiosity does is it allows us to say, I'm curious about the possibility of what could happen with this experience. I'm curious what this relationship might be like. I'm curious about what the therapist can offer, what I might learn about myself, what it might do for my life. I'm curious about it. And curiosity is often much easier to access than hope or excitement or any of those types of emotions. So when you're going into therapy and maybe you're feeling a little bit hesitant or nervous, try to access that curiosity about what the experience could be like, because I think that'll be, your strongest asset going into that first session.
And the other tip that I'd like to give out as somebody who's been on the other end of this multiple times is most therapists will give you a free intro phone call that they'll talk to you for 10 or 15 minutes.
Yep.
And it enables you. I am somebody who doesn't like to walk into situations that I don't know how it's going to go. Like anything that's unexpected or surprise does not work for me very well. So being able to talk to a therapist for 10 or 15 minutes and get a vibe for them and how they are and how they're going to talk and what they're going to sound like and whatever else will help you also to better prepare yourself for what this first session is really going to be about. So you're not walking in completely cold.
Absolutely.
So if make sure that if you're looking at prospective therapists, take that 15-minute. I mean, I've literally had first calls turn into hour and a half long conversations before we even get started. So, that'll also be able to tell you whether or not you're going to vibe with your therapist and, get that feeling of comfort before walking in the door for the first time.
That's a great point.
And last question that we have is, what should a client come to session with for maximum impact for therapy sessions? And that could be thought process, that could be a notebook, that could be whatever it is that that you feel is most important.
Yeah, so I'm going to go back to what I said before too about that curiosity and willingness and openness to learn and to experience. I think that's going to be the most important thing, because a lot of times people want to go into therapy knowing what to expect, knowing what's going to happen, having that certainty, and that's just not possible. But if we can go in with the openness, the curiosity, the willingness to just see what it's like, we might be surprised. So I think that would be the most important thing to go into a session with.
All right. So now I will leave you with an open floor to give any final piece of advice that you have for people that are struggling with panic and anxiety, as far as what they can do to try and help get themselves better. Anything, doesn't have to be on this topic. It can be anything you want to say, as far as like your best piece of advice.
Okay, my best piece of advice. Let's see. I think being gentle with yourself, being self-compassionate, I think would be the biggest thing, because anxiety, panic, any mental health condition has a way of making you feel like, you're unworthy, you're a burden, there's something wrong with you. Like, our brains tend to do really funky and terrible things to ourselves. Our brains are really mean to us sometimes. So when it comes down to it, if you can find that space for some self-compassion, for being gentle with yourself, for recognizing that you're human, I think that can be the most important thing, because once we have that self-compassion or that ability to be gentle, it becomes a lot easier to challenge ourselves and to work through the things that are bothering us, because we can do it from a place of gentleness and compassion. So that would be my main piece of advice.
All right, fantastic. And then lastly, give your socials out one more time so people want to find you. Where can they find you?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram, therapist who sees a therapist, with underscores between each of those words. If you search my name as well, it'll come up, Gabrielle Ferrara, LCSW.
Perfect. Thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate your time. And you have been listening to the One Good Day podcast. If you'd like more resources on panic and anxiety, please go to our website, panicyandanxiety.org.